Prediction is not anything new, of course. People have always been trying to predict. You know, they stare up at the stars and try to figure out what they mean. Nostradamus stared at a bowl of water to figure out what was going to happen in the world and then wrote some mumbo-jumbo quatrains, which only after the events people could look at and say, he predicted that. Very smart guy. And all of those methods have one thing in common: they don't work. So what I want to talk about is a way to predict and to engineer future events that does work. And when I say it does work, I want to put a marker down. As mentioned, the Central Intelligence Agency has evaluated my models in a couple of thousand applications. And it's not just that they've concluded that the models are more accurate than their analysts, which indeed they have concluded, which doesn't make their analysts terribly happy with me. They concluded it's right about 90% of the time, and it hits the bullseye more than twice as often as their analysts. Game theory is about working out the strategic responses of people, anticipating what they will do, and choosing your best moves given what you think others will do. Now, game theory makes a few very simple assumptions about people. Game theory assumes people are rational. By rational, all that is meant is that people try to do what they believe is in their best interest. Rationality does not mean looking at all of the various options that a person has and choosing the best one. Indeed, if you try to look at everything you could do, you're probably behaving irrationally, because the cost of continuing to search eventually is going to exceed the expected gain of the continued search. And when the cost exceeds the gain, it makes no sense to keep on looking. So rationality just says people do what they believe is in their best interest. Now, that means that people have values and people have beliefs. Values are the things that they want. And people are free, of course, to choose their values. They're shaped by their families, by their experience, by the cultural environment that they live in. There's nothing rational or irrational about what people want. There is something rational about what they do to achieve what they want. So they have values and they have beliefs. They have beliefs, for example, about how other people will react to them. What sorts of people others are. Are they the kinds of people who want to be tough, bully them? Are they the sorts of people who want to cooperate and try to find compromises and so forth? That means they face uncertainty. They know their beliefs are just that, beliefs. They're not certain knowledge about how others will respond. And they make choices under constraints. Besides the beliefs and the uncertainty, they have some pool of resources. They're limited by what they have. If you are the king of Nepal, you might aspire to conquer Europe. You just don't have the wherewithal. You are constrained. You know that you are constrained. You can't do it. That's game theory reasoning. It's working backwards, thinking about what's the other guy going to do and then deciding what your actions should be. Okay, so if one wants to construct a model to analyze foreign policy problems, how do we start? Well, for one thing, we want to think about who are all of the individuals and groups that will try to shape a decision on a given policy, not just who are the key decision makers who will make the policy. For example, if we're thinking about what to do about Iran's nuclear program, we know that the President of the United States will make a policy choice. But let's face it, President Obama probably doesn't know a lot about Iran. So he's going to turn to his advisors. He's got his Secretary of State, he has a National Security Advisor, he has a Secretary of Defense, he has a Secretary of Energy, and so forth. He's going to turn to these people and ask, what do you think we should do about Iran? What will be the effective strategy? And let's face it, Stephen Chu is a very, 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 very smart man. He used to be my next-door neighbor. I babysat for his children. He's got a Nobel Prize in physics. He knows about particles interacting. He does not know a lot about people interacting strategically, and he probably doesn't know much about Iran. Hillary Clinton probably doesn't know that much about Iran either. So they have advisors. They turn to their advisors who do know about Iran, about energy policy, about nuclear developments and so forth. And those people may exert a great deal of influence in what bubbles up to be the recommendations that the president receives and that eventually translates into his policy. So if we ignore those people farther down the ladder, we're going to get the analysis wrong, because they are the people shaping the views. And of course, that's just one side. The Iranians have their own set of advisors. I suspect that Ali Khamenei doesn't know a lot about uranium enrichment. He probably knows more than he cares to know, but he's probably not an expert on it. He turns to people as well to get advice. So if we want to analyze problems, we need to pay attention to a large number of people who are shaping the choices. People who are advisors, people who are lobbyists, people who are in interest groups, people who can organize street demonstrations, anybody who can shape how others will think about the choice that they should make. Real decision makers who don't have the benefits of a computer model sadly tend to have to take intellectual shortcuts. So they don't pay attention to all those many, many influencers. They say, well, yeah, there are 50, 60, 80, 100, 200 people trying to shape things. There are 5 factorial possible interactions of interest. That's 120. Actually, only 60 of them are really important, at least according to my model, and a smart person can keep that straight in their head. If you have 10 decision makers, still a very small problem, there are 3.6 million possible interactions, 10 factorial. Nobody can keep that straight in their head. Again, we don't really care about all of those, at least I don't. I do care about a little over 5,000 of them, and nobody can keep that straight in their heads. Now think about writing down a model. So a model is just a bundle of equations. It's math. But the math means that the logic is transparent. You can work through exactly how one goes from input information to results. It will work 24 hours a day. It can crunch through all of the possible interactions. So it is certainly not smarter than a smart decision maker, but it is better equipped to pay attention to all of the subtle, nuanced details that real people have to skip over and, unfortunately, sometimes, as a result, make errors. Hence, I believe the explanation for why the model gets about 90% right and intelligence analysts get a lot less right, because they have to take the intellectual shortcuts. Okay, so if we keep track of all of that information, then what are the data that we need? We're going to work out what people are going to do. You'll be surprised to find out how little you actually need to know. You need to know, what does each player say it wants? What's its position on the issue? Not what in its heart of hearts does it really want. Very hard to know that. But what is the position that it has staked out? Because that's a strategically chosen position. You can work backwards from that to draw some interesting inferences about them. What do they say they want? How important is the issue to them? How willing are they to drop what they are doing and pay attention to the issue when it comes up instead of something else that they have to deal with? How high a priority is it? How resolved are they? That is, how much are they committed to finding an agreement, even if it's not the outcome they desire, compared to being committed to sticking to their position, even if it means coming to no agreement, going down in a blaze of glory. And finally, we need one more piece of information about everybody. How much clout could they bring to bear? How persuasive could they be if they chose to be? So, what do they say they want? How focused are they on the problem? How resolved are they? How influential could they be? 4 numbers for each player. If we know those 4 numbers, we can plug that into a game like my computer model, which, by the way, if you want to try it, you can play this game. You can download it. It's on www.predictioneersgame.com. So you can fiddle with it. It's set up so that you can make predictions, but you can't engineer. Just 4 numbers for each party. Now notice what I have not included. Nothing about emotions. Game theory does not deal with emotions, except if emotions are used strategically to gain advantage. But real, raw emotion has no place. I have said nothing about history. I love history. I read a lot of history. I've written some about history. But I've not mentioned history as an input to the model. I've not mentioned culture. That is the very things that most people think are central to working out what's going to happen in the world. Now, I believe that history and culture shape those 4 numbers for each of the players. But if we have the 4 numbers, we don't have to know what shaped them. All we have to do is know those 4 numbers. It's like walking in on a chess game. You come into the middle of a chess game, it's black's moved, you look at the board, you don't know how the board got where it is, but you can work out what's the next move for black to make if you're a reasonably decent chess player. You don't have to know how the game got there. You know that the players are self-interested, they want to win, and therefore you can work out what they're going to do. I believe firmly if people think they have a method for predicting and engineering the future, they should come out and state what they think is going to happen, and if there's time, why, rather than after the fact say, oh, I knew that was going to happen. I realized that. Or after the fact, provide an explanation. It's incredibly easy to fit facts to known outcomes. The hard challenge is to dare to be embarrassed and make the predictions before the events happen. So let me talk a little bit about the upcoming Copenhagen meeting, designed to try to control greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. My analyses indicate that we may get an agreement out of Copenhagen. It will be meaningless. Why will it be meaningless? It is the nature of universal treaties to be meaningless. What is the nature of a universal agreement? So it has to be an agreement that just about everybody will sign, otherwise it's not universal. Why will they sign? Universal agreements ask people to do one of 2 things. Either they ask them not to change their behavior, in which case they're perfectly happy to sign and comply because it doesn't ask them to do anything, or it asks them to fundamentally change their behavior and then lacks teeth. It either has no monitoring mechanism to detect cheating, or if it has a monitoring mechanism, it has no way to enforce punishment. So as we think ahead to Copenhagen, let me reflect back on Kyoto. 175 countries signed Kyoto. The United States did not, but 175 did. Now, people were ecstatic about such a broad-based agreement. Really, for the first time, we were going to take charge of global warming. Unfortunately, they didn't read the fine print. So of the 175 signatories to Kyoto, 137 have to do nothing except report on what they have done. We are proud to report this year we have done nothing. We are in full compliance with the Kyoto Protocol. As we promised, we have reported. 137 out of 175 had to do nothing. Well, the host country came forward. We deeply regret we are unable to meet the greenhouse gas emission standards that we signed. And the British in lockstep did the same, and lots of others. And what was the consequence? None. There's no punishment in the Kyoto Protocol. There's no consequence for signing and then violating the agreement. And that is the nature of universal agreements. They either ask people to do nothing, so of course they comply, or they ask them to do something serious, and then they shut their eyes so they can't see whether or not they're actually doing it, or they're in violation. Now we have to ask then, why do people promote universal treaties instead of taking unilateral action? And the answer is actually quite straightforward. If you can say, well, we can't cut our greenhouse gas emissions because, after all, India and China and Brazil and some other rapidly developing countries are not cutting theirs. It would be unfair to put our citizens face a burden while these other people continue to pollute. Stepping back and saying, I have a different plan. We will unilaterally impose very high taxes on fossil fuel use. Two main fossil fuel uses that are heavy polluters. Gasoline, you know that. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know. Fertilizer. Fertilizer is a bigger greenhouse gas emitter than gasoline. So if we put a heavy tax on fertilizer and on gasoline, it will be more expensive to drive big cars, and it'll be more expensive to buy produce at the supermarket. Now we can figure out why this doesn't happen. Now we could use those tax dollars to help compensate the Indians, the Chinese, and so forth for switching to cleaner energy sources. And we could use some of the leftover money to sponsor research on cleaner energy uses. But I'm sure that you all know that foreign aid is very unpopular. Because what happens is the voter looks at this and says, oh, I'm not going to vote for somebody who's taxing me to give money to people in some faraway country that I've never been to, never going to visit. And so they say no. And therefore the politicians don't make these proposals. Instead, they propose a universal treaty, and then we all feel good when it gets signed and feel disappointed when it doesn't get enforced and don't work out. What was the strategic reasoning behind that? It was the politicians wanted to get reelected, and you were not going to reelect them if they did the right thing. Okay, let me wrap up. Game theory is a transparent form of logic that with data can help to predict the future, not a pie-in-the-sky claim. It's been done. I've been doing it. Others have been doing it for 30 years. It works. Not everything is predictable, but an awful lot is predictable. I at least can't predict markets because my models are concerned with problems that involve the opportunity for negotiation in the face of the threat of coercion. And if you can predict, then there's a very good prospect that you can find better solutions to problems, that you can engineer. You can find better approaches that will change how other people perceive the situation they're in, change their beliefs, and produce better outcomes. Thank you very much.